The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Litigation in Light of COVID-19. Before we get started, we have just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. The first announcement, you might have noticed that you're currently in listen-only mode. This is to ensure that everyone can hear the presentation and there's less background noise. You can ask questions during the presentation. On your screen, you should still have the GoToWebinar pop-up, and on that pop-up, there's a questions button. If you enter that question, it'll be seen by the moderator and will be part of today's session, and we'd be delighted to answer your questions. Second announcement, today's webinar is not for CLE credit. Again, today's webinar is not for CLE credit. Today's webinar is just a tour and informational webinar to give you information about this particular topic, but it is not intended for CLE credit at this time. Thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation, and I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Michael Sander, the founder and managing director of Docket Alarm.
Thank you so much, Erin. And thank you all for joining today. Today is episode 3 of this litigation in light of COVID-19. If you haven't seen the first 2 webinars, that's perfectly all right. These are going to be just moderately building upon the other 2, but we're going to have a nice recap so we can you can see, so you can follow through it. Just a quick background about us and who we are. You all probably are familiar with Fastcase and or Docket Alarm, but those who are not, my name is Michael Sander. I'm the founder of Docket Alarm, which is a dockets and litigation analytic database. In my former career, I was a software developer. Then I became an intellectual property attorney, litigating patents in a variety of different jurisdictions. And at that time is when I began founding Docket Alarm, which is a litigation analytics and research company. I'll go into more detail about what we can do there. Fastcase, as you may know, is a leading research provider across the United States. They have hundreds of thousands of active users. Many people get Fastcase through their bar memberships or via just their law firm subscriptions. Fastcase acquired Docket Alarm in 2018, and we're now all part of the same family. I'm going to skip this slide. So there's 4 main things that Docket Alarm does, but this is not a demo for Docket Alarm. However, we're going to be using the tools within Docket Alarm to kind of pull out insights from regarding COVID-19. The tools that are at our disposal are tracking cases, the ability to kind of see what's going on in the court system and stay up to date on it, searching for a needle in the haystack, finding those specific dockets, the specific issues that we really care about, analytics, which is all about seeing the top-down picture, seeing thousands of cases all at once, which we're going to really get into today quite deeply. And then finally, our API, which is really for custom analysis. And while this could definitely be a useful tool for researching COVID-19 related litigation issues, we're not going to really touch upon that today. So with that, just want to give an overview of what I think this presentation is and what this is not. This is not going to be a complete survey of all coronavirus cases. So if that's what you're looking for, that's not what this talk is. This is not really going to be giving you specific guidance for your business or your firm. What we're really trying to show you is how to use tools to actually dig into legal data, how you can actually use tools to actually provide insight to your clients. Many of the people on the phone today are attorneys. It's your task to actually provide these insights to your clients. We're not doing that for you. We are showing you, giving you the tools so that you can provide that insight to your clients yourself. So today, the quick outline of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to have a quick recap from last week. I just want to briefly go over, this is going to probably be less than 5 minutes of everything that we kind of talked about last week. Then we're going to go into COVID-19 legal litigation analytics. This is going to be the really interesting part, I think, because we're going to be seeing for the first time what is going on in litigation surrounding COVID-19. And we go into pretty deeply here, especially with respect to criminal law. Finally, I'm just gonna go, if we have time, this entire talk is planned for about 30, 35 minutes. If we have enough time, I'm gonna go into a few more interesting COVID-19 lawsuits and kind of show you a little bit smattering of what's out there right now. So let's just talk about the recap. So from last week we talked about standing orders and continuances and dockets and generally litigation fallout, and then procedural filing issues. So very quickly, I want to just go over this. The key thing to understand with standing orders is you can find them on Docket Alarm, which is, many people might not think, why would I use a docket product to find standing orders? And the reason is, let me just bounce into the product. If we just search for standing order COVID-19 on Docket Alarm, we're going to get quite a few results. And the reason is that many court systems actually fashion their standing orders as dockets. So here is, there's a bunch of them here. This is just 2 days ago. This is the New York Southern District Court. This is a docket sheet, but it's also a standing order. And this is exceedingly common within many federal district courts to actually fashion their standing orders as docket sheets. So Docket Alarm actually has a very nice library of all of these different standing orders that you can find just by doing a simple search like this. I went through all these standing orders. As you can see, actually, how many results do we have? We have over 1,000, but if you limit it just to like a particular jurisdiction, which we can do, let's say federal, New York. Where's New York? If you limit it to a particular jurisdiction, we'll get far fewer, 153. This is for all of New York State federal cases. I've went through and actually analyzed, kind of pulled out all these different docket sheets, and you can see the search I have right up here at the top. This is a developing, event. Literally, we're getting standing orders every single day. March 13th, it was a very general order that was issued about the health and safety of being at the courthouse. They did a full courthouse shutdown. Where is it in here? On the 16th, 3 days later. Essential workers were put on leave on the 18th. And even just, yesterday, they had some additional rules on emergency applications. I'll point out, I've been to the court's website, to the SDNY's website. I couldn't find many of these recent standing orders. They will appear, I'm sure, probably within a few hours. For all I know, they probably put it on this morning. But there's definitely a lag time between when the standing order gets issued and when it appears on the court's website, depending on the court. So, having standing orders available within a docket system can be very nice. And this is actually, pretty important, depending on, no matter what jurisdiction you're in. We've gone through this and found in a lot of different jurisdictions, all these different types of standing orders that are going on. And actually, even in Illinois, Cook County, there's some standing orders. In state courts, there's also these similarly fashioned docket-style standing orders. So when you're looking for what's going on in a particular court, definitely go to the court website. Definitely go to, the higher level, the appellate court's website. But you might also want to check a docket product too, because very often they're in the docket products. There's additional information in the docket products that are not in that are not on the court's website, or they're updated more quickly. So just a quick overview of some of the topics we talked about yesterday. I spent a long time on talking about continuances and delays, which, in normal circumstances would not be everybody's favorite topic. But now it's obviously pretty active and coming up quite a bit. So this is the type of search that I was able to do. Let me just run this search now so you get a sense. Look, there was 4,000 results. The screenshot I took last week, you can see there's 4,410 results. I'm going to rerun the search right now. And you can see in last week, it's shot up quite a bit. So we have about 8,300, about 8,000 new. It's tripled in 1 week, the number of coronavirus or COVID-19 related continuances that have popped up. And, these are going to be across the board. Last week, I spent quite a bit of time talking about going into a little bit more detail about what these continuances are all about. I found, for example, a few which were actually denied. They're not going to go into the substance here, but I was just searching for continuance or delay within 3 words of the word denied from March 15th, 2020. And just for those who are a little bit unfamiliar with legal search systems, what this is doing is it's looking for the word continuance or the word delay, and only looking for those words when they're within 3 words of the word denied. And then we have a date limiter only looking from March 15th, 2020. So this is a really nice way to find any continuance requests that were denied for whatever reason. We found a bunch. Here's one in Connecticut State Court. It was basically a denial without prejudice. It was a little bit more of a procedural act. But then I found one that was completely substantive. And they really just said, we don't think the problem is serious enough. We're going to deny the continuance. And here is, the judge saying, that having considered the motion and striving to balance this decision between the competing parameters of prudence and panic, the court is of the opinion the motion should be denied. I'll note that this is on March 12th. This is when this decision came out. 1 week later, on March 19th, they issued a renewed joint motion for a 30-day continuance, and the motion was granted. So obviously, things are changing on the ground very, very quickly. What was true last week might not be true this week. So having being able to stay up to date on what's going on in your cases and what's going on in the cases around the country is imperative. I'll talk and just briefly review the fun cases. This is litigation fallout. I have a number of new cases that we'll be talking about at the end, but just wanted to raise this. This was a Princess Cruise Line. They've already been sued, the cruise ship itself was called the Grand Princess. And I found it kind of interesting that they launched this lawsuit while they were still passengers on board the Grand Princess. So suing the boats that you're currently residing on seems, I don't know, a little bit aggressive to me. But these cases are coming up, and we'll have a little bit of time to talk about them as well. I have a bunch of cases in here. I'd like to come back to them if we have a little bit of time, but I'd like to skip ahead. Actually, I'll skip ahead, but before we get right to the analytics, there was one last topic, which is procedural issues. Right now, it can actually be hard to file a case in federal or state court. If you can't physically go to the courthouse, if there's no clerk to look over the filings, it can actually, there's a lot, and if there's any special requirements about like meet and confers before you file a case, filing cases actually can be pretty difficult right now. And that isn't necessarily a problem unless it can be a significant one if you're running up against a statute of limitations. So we tried to find new cases that were being filed and what hoops people are jumping through to try to get these new cases on file. And this is a search that we did, and let me just run it again. Basically, we're just looking for the words COVID or coronavirus over here. And then on the left-hand side, we just looked for pleadings only. And there's 577 pleadings that mention COVID-19 or coronavirus. These are basically case initiation documents. Depending on which court you are, they might call them complaints, common. But in some other agencies, they might be petitions or applications. And let me just put a date filter in here. This is from January. There's actually quite a few documents that are older, and they actually relate to general coronavirus. Coronavirus is a very general term. So let me just put a date limiter on here, 3/15/2020. And so now, you can see these are a bunch of different new applications or new complaints that are being filed. There's a lot of applications. We can actually put another filter on here to try to remove it. Let's say we don't want any agencies, we just want courts. So we have this filter called is court that removes all the agencies. And here we have about 82 different applications that were, complaints that were filed mentioning COVID-19 or coronavirus. So there's quite a few things that are going on. Some of the issues that we found, in New York State, there's a lot of pre-filing requirements, and a lot of the different, the plaintiffs could not meet them, and they were running up against the statute of limitations, so they just did not do them at all. Some other interesting things that they have to, in New York State also, plaintiffs, the party actually filing this, you have to make affirmations that what they say in their complaint is true. A lot of these cannot be done as well. So they just went ahead and filed the case without them. You can file these cases and see if this will actually have some sort of impact on the case or not. But the attorneys basically are writing that they're doing this in lieu of the clients doing it because they're going to be running up against the statute of limitations. So this is just kind of flagging a number of kind of procedural issues that are coming up regularly right now in litigation. I want to move ahead. That's kind of the end of the recap here and beginning of the pretty much all brand new material. Part of the trouble is of kind of giving a talk like this is, it's so broad. Where do you even start? COVID-19 is affecting virtually every aspect of the U.S. the international economy, the entire global economy. Where do you even begin to talk about like what's going on, who's being affected? You really need a tool that's going to give you a top-down picture, a broad overview. Doing random searches here and there to find interesting issues definitely works, but it's very hard to see the top-down of what's going on. So Docket Alarm has a tool called the Analytics Workbench that helps you kind of put this together. We're going to start simple, and by doing this, we're trying to ask what can court dockets actually tell us about what's going on with COVID-19? What are the questions that we can ask? And how consistent and reliable is our analytics with respect to COVID-19? So I put together some very, very basic analytics. Actually, here's are my two sets of analytics that I put together in COVID-19. As you can see, you can actually build your own analytics. So we're going to have our high-level analysis that I'm going to talk about. Let's take a look and view them. And so this is just our very high-level analysis. I'm going to show you what we're doing here, and then I'm going to try to briefly get into how we're doing it. And then once I tell you how we're doing it, I'm going to show you a more advanced version of this. So you can try to be able to build your own analytics and analyze cases in your own way. So the purpose of these analytics is to determine how courts are reacting to the COVID-19 crisis. At this initial time, these analytics, the ones I'm showing you right now, are relatively superficial. They only look to see which cases are discussing COVID-19 on the docket sheet. They do not analyze substantive issues related to COVID-19. All right, so what we're looking for here in these analytics is we're just looking for the words COVID-19 or coronavirus. When were they mentioned on the docket? How were they mentioned on the docket? That sort of thing. Which courts were they mentioned in? This is just really giving us a broad level overview. So what we're looking at here, this first initial graph, is just showing us all of the cases that mention COVID-19. When were they filed? All right, so there are 6,000 cases that were filed in 2019 that today mention coronavirus. So this doesn't mean that this is when they mention them, but this is when they were filed. And there's cases that go back much further, obviously. We're also showing you the top case types, which case types are mentioning coronavirus. And there's a lot of different differentiation among these case types, and I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail in just a few minutes. But what I also want to show you, this is actually kind of where the meat is in some ways. This is showing you at what dates on the docket sheet was COVID-19 mentioned. All right, and you can see here, basically 2019 up and through March, it was basically not mentioned at all, and then boom, March 20th, 2020, immediately we have 14,000 cases that are mentioning it. And then April 2nd and April 3rd, I ran these analytics yesterday. So for 2 days, we have 776 already. So you can get a quick sense. This is just a monthly view. If we want to take a look at daily, we can reformat that and take a look at daily. And you can see basically, it was actually pretty quiet up and through March. And then, on March 26th, for whatever reason, huge number of cases were filed. Let's just take a quick peek at these. So you can actually view, I just clicked on March 18th. We can take a look at these are all the cases that mention COVID-19 on March 18th. Here is, I don't know, a bankruptcy case that's mentioning it, that we're just kind of randomly looking at it. No, and even it's right here on March 18th. COVID-19 debtor appeared. I'm sorry. This is basically an adjournment, right? So this is a statement adjourning a 341 meeting. So if you're any bankruptcy attorneys on, a lot of the 341 meetings are going to be continued. This is just a message saying, hey, this is going to be continued as a result of COVID-19. And there was thousands of them that were done, or I guess we had 1,500 of them done on March 18th, and it looks like about 3,000 of them done on the 26th. So this is already telling us quite a bit. You can kind of see the buildup of when COVID-19 is being mentioned. And also, I'll just add the way that we set these analytics up. If COVID-19 is mentioned more than once on the docket sheet, this date is the earliest of the mentions. So you can already see very quickly kind of when these things are being mentioned. Up here, we can take a look at the courts, and we can see how much COVID-19 is mentioned based on each court. And immediately what pops up is Illinois State, Cook County has it mentioned in 6,500 different cases. This is kind of immediately pops out, and you might be asking why. This is already telling you a little bit of information here. Each court is responding to the COVID-19 crisis a little bit differently. In some cases, they issue a standing order that it's every attorney's responsibility to read, and the standing order automatically applies to every single case. In other courts, it's entirely up to the judge. The judge can make all the decisions. And in what appears to happen in the Illinois State Court, if we take a look at these, we can actually go and we can look at all the underlying cases. What happens in Illinois is, it's Illinois Cook County, by the way, Chicago. I'm just pulling up the first case that comes up so we can take a look. So what the court did is they issued a standing order, and simultaneously when they issued the standing order, they put a message on every single case to notify all the litigants that, hey, the standing order is going out. They actually went one step further, where the Southern District of New York kind of puts out the standing orders, and it's the attorney's responsibility to go and know that these standing orders are there. In Chicago, they've actually been a little bit more proactive and sent these out and posted them right to the docket sheet so the litigants can all see them. Each jurisdiction has their own way of informing the litigants and the public, but it's interesting to see that Cook County, Chicago actually did this through the docketing system itself. There's a number of other insights that you can kind of pull out of this, but again, this is very superficial, high-level analysis. It's not intended to really get us real substantive, meaningful data, but it's really the kind of question is like, which courts are actually mentioning this? When are these entries appearing in the docket sheet? That's kind of wrapping our head around the bigger picture here. So I went through a lot of these different cases and the case types, and the vast majority, just going back to that graph, the vast majority of these mentions are all about continuances, right? And as much as I love talking about continuances, the vast majority of them are all being granted or done automatically without even a request. So it's not terribly interesting. Civil litigation, at least trials and live hearings, is crawling to a complete halt. There's no question about that. But I wanted to build another set of analytics that actually gives us some real meaningful insight. And while civil litigation is pretty much going on pause, criminal cases are definitely not. There are statutory and constitutional reasons why criminal cases have to move forward despite the pandemic. And so we've actually done a bit of analysis on criminal cases to try to show what's going on there. This is also very initial. I did this analysis. I built this set of analytics yesterday. And what we're actually doing here is we're analyzing federal criminal cases in light of COVID-19. As far as I know, these are the first set of litigation analytics, of substantive litigation analytics surrounding COVID-19. So our methodology. So what did we actually do here? We looked at a sample of federal criminal cases that mentioned coronavirus or COVID-19 on the docket. So that's, in some ways, it's very similar to our last search, our last set of analytics, but we're also limiting to federal criminal cases. We then analyze what type of events are occurring, tagging the following. We tag motions for release generally. So anytime a criminal defendant made a motion for a release of custody from custody, we then did a motion for release regarding COVID-19. So this is basically anytime that did a motion for request for release based primarily on COVID-19 occurring. Then we also tagged which cases actually had responses from the government. When did the U.S. Attorney's Office file a response? Then, as far as the judges' side of things, we actually looked at which judges were actually had orders at all mentioning COVID-19, and then which judges actually released prisoners due to COVID-19. So this actually starts getting to significantly more substantive material due to some time constraints, and unfortunately due to some PACER fee issues. We were not able to do a complete sample, a complete picture of everything that's going on. So we did a random sample of 320 cases. I can get into why we couldn't do a complete analysis of this. It's largely due to the federal government charging up to $3 for access to each one of these cases. So this is one of the banes of PACER fees that we have to face when we're dealing with federal cases. So we're going to jump into these analytics. But before we jump in and give you the answer, I wanted to show you how is it that we're building this. Michael, I'm a developer. I know how to code, but to do this, you do not need to know how to code. So rather than jumping into the criminal cases and how I built those, I wanted to really just show you how I built the simple high-level one, because the criminal cases one does get a little bit involved. But here is basically the construction panel, if you will, for building a set of analytics. And this is how we built the last set of analytics. We just give it a name and a description here. And then we set our library up. And our library is just any docket sheet that mentions the word COVID-19 or coronavirus. And we use the hyphen there to kind of analyze whether it's a one-word coronavirus or two words. It'll capture both. If I got rid of the hyphen, then it would just capture it as a single word, but now it captures it as one or two words, right? It tells us there's 15,000 dockets in here, but what we care about is not just to look at the cases that mention it. We want to know when they were mentioned. When was COVID-19 or coronavirus mentioned? So we have to tag these cases with mentions of coronavirus or COVID-19. So I just clicked on the button Edit Tags, and this brings us to a tag editor. I know this is getting a little technical here, but this will take just 2 minutes. Bear with me, and then we'll get into the substance of the criminal cases. So the tag editor, you can actually set up any tags that you want. Over here on the right-hand side, this is kind of a tag editor. And on the left-hand side, in the main screen, you get to see a case. And this is a random case that mentions COVID-19 or coronavirus. All right. So what we can do is set up this tag, and let's actually just look to see. And here you can see right at the top, there's some sort of hearing review, post-COVID-19, general order. So this is a very general order. Where was this case? This is a California State Court case in Fresno County Superior Court. And this also looks like a criminal case. But again, this is a randomly selected case out of those 15,000. And it looks like there is going to be a hearing put in place on July 2nd. So that would be the tag for this case. We kind of want to tag, hey, on July 2nd of 2020, there's going to be some hearing related to COVID-19 in some way. So to build the tag for this, all we do is go to the tag editor, create a new tag, we give it a tag name, and then this is the real trick. This is a real key of how we tag things. Rather than going through these cases one by hand, we create a rule. And the rule says, anytime the words COVID-19 or coronavirus or the word pandemic is mentioned on the docket sheet, then we apply the COVID-19 mentioned tag, all right? And that's it. And once we have that rule set up, you can see I just did a test, and we can apply this tag to COVID-19. And the way that the analytics workbench actually works is we will set up these tags on COVID-19, and we'll kind of go through a few cases and setting up a handful of rules. And then what we can do is we can go back and run those rules on a large set of 15,000 cases. So I don't have to go through 15,000 cases and tag up COVID-19 or coronavirus. I just set these rules up, and then we can just basically do a run of this, and it will run through all those cases very, very rapidly for us, and then generate charts and data based on that. So the types of things you can tag, this was a very superficial one, but you can do quite a bit of other types of heavier analysis. Now, I'm not going to show you how I set up the criminal, oh, here, it was right here, the criminal cases, because that would take a little bit too much time. But I actually set up, I went into much further detail. I set up a bunch of different tags here. Again, motion for release is one tag, motion for release regarding coronavirus, order regarding coronavirus, or an order for release regarding coronavirus, and also response to motion for release. So I set up these 5 different tags, and then was very quickly able to run them across all of these different dockets. So let's take a look at some of these results and finally get to what we're actually trying to show. We can actually analyze this data by court, by judge. There's a whole bunch of data. We can actually spend quite a bit of time in here. But let's just quickly take a look at this. So here's 343 cases. Again, this is a chart showing when these cases were filed that are being affected by coronavirus. And what's interesting is, there's, for the most part, they're very recent cases, but you can see there's some cases back in January 2006, a 10 or 15-year-old case that is somehow or another being affected for it. Here we get to see motions for release. So these are motions for release when they were filed, whether or not they were related for coronavirus. So again, we're looking at cases that are mentioned coronavirus or COVID-19 somewhere on the docket sheet, anywhere on the docket sheet. And now we're looking at when a motion for release of custody actually was mentioned. And what's interesting here is you can see that, in the past there weren't that many, and now it's kind of bumped up dramatically. And you can actually, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, a lot of people are asking for a release from custody due to coronavirus. And here is actually the real meat of it. Here we're actually seeing motions for release that actually mention coronavirus in their motion for release. So these are not just general requests for a motion for release from custody. These are motions for release from custody when they're actually mentioning COVID-19. And again, we're in monthly view. I can pretty quickly go to daily view, and it'll pop right up. You'll see the ramp up during March. What's interesting, April, it's only 2 days into April, and there's already quite a few cases that have popped up. The next chart that we're showing you is the number of orders that are mentioning coronavirus. And again, this is kind of very similar to the last kind of set of analytics that we've done. But these are any orders mentioning coronavirus in federal criminal cases that mention coronavirus somewhere. So pretty much all of them do, and all of them do in March. And then finally, this is kind of what we're actually looking for. We're really looking for orders of release from custody that mention coronavirus inside the release from custody. And so this is actually where the real insights are coming from. You can actually see there's quite a few release orders that are already happening. They don't seem to quite match up nearly as many as motions, but there's quite a few that are actually coming out. What I haven't done yet is I have not subdivided them into grants or denials. Some of these orders regarding release are actually denials. So let's take a quick look and view these results so you can see some of them. Let's just click on the first one. And then here, sure enough, here it is. So there's an order of release involving a particular criminal defendant. And then it's basically setting a hearing that the defendant has to go to in a few days. This is a lot of people are getting released early, or getting their bails basically eliminated due to overcrowding the prisons, due to coronavirus, and you're actually seeing some of this come up quite a bit. What's also interesting, we can actually break this down by court and show you which courts are actually, releasing the most, or have the most federal criminal cases that are touching on coronavirus in standard ways. The New York Southern District Court is a very, busy federal criminal docket. jurisdiction. So obviously it has the most number of cases overall. But what I'd like to see is what I want to look for. We want to look for the jurisdictions that actually have the most number of motions for release regarding coronavirus. And so, this is actually showing of the 136 federal criminal cases that mention coronavirus, 17 in New York have, in their motion for release, they're mentioning COVID-19. So this got the greatest number. What's interesting is Nebraska, there's quite a few motions, but no motions for release actually mention coronavirus at all. This kind of shows you like the extent of which New York is being significantly more affected by the coronavirus compared to others. So this kind of, I don't want to go on for too long. There's a lot of other insights you can pull out of these analytics. We can look at individual judges and see what's going on with particular judges and whether or not they are releasing criminal defendants due to coronavirus or not. I don't know. We can take a look at this particular judge and get a particular judge profile of them. So let's say there's motions for release for Judge John Gerard. These are overall motions for release. And let's take a look and see what was just filed here. So there's 2 cases that were filed in March. So again, this is a case where COVID-19 is mentioned on the docket somewhere or another, and there was a motion for release that was just pulled in March. So if we take a look, this is going to take a little bit of time to process. But on here, this judge is actually wrestling whether to release somebody from custody or not. And I wanted to really keep this presentation as short as possible. So there's not quite enough time to dig into the real deep substance here. But being able to pull up this judge by judge analytics can be very, very helpful. One last topic I want to touch on, because this is a problem with all litigation analytics that you kind of have to always be mindful of. Really, what you want to be careful is you don't want to claim that your analytics do more than they actually do. Right now, we took a sample of 320 cases, federal criminal cases. Obviously, there's many, many more that are out there that mention COVID-19 or coronavirus. The problem, I alluded to this earlier, the reason why we were not able to pull significantly more is because of PACER fees. For those who practice in federal courts, the federal government charges money to look at a case information. And they charge anywhere from 10 cents to $3 per case. So if you're doing any analysis of a large number of cases, you're paying $3 a pop for each, up to $3 a pop for every single case, which makes doing this type of analysis in federal court very, very expensive. So here's my 30-second pitch. If there's anyone from the federal judiciary on the call today, these fees are having a significant impact on what researchers are able to do with federal data in federal courts. And if they were able to lift that paywall ban, I mean, we spent a couple $100 pulling these 320 dockets down. If they were able to pull to lift that paywall ban, we would be able to see significantly more. We'd actually be able to get a comprehensive picture of what's going on in COVID-19. All right, so that's the quick overview of a 15-minute overview of what customized analytics can do in a crisis like this. I focus again on criminal cases largely because criminal cases are very, very active right now, or I wouldn't say very active. They are proceeding despite coronavirus, rather than whereas civil cases have very much ground to a halt in many cases, in many jurisdictions. Right. So this is that's kind of the end of the analytics section. I kind of want to just pull up one or two other maybe lighter notes of these new cases that are coming out. I'm not sure there's any light notes to really be said here, but some other interesting cases that we were able to pull out of the docket sheet. Senator Burr is being sued for insider trading for knowing more about the coronavirus earlier than the U.S. public did. There's a link to the docket sheet here. I forgot exactly what this one is. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a securities litigation case already due to a broken contract that's already coming out today. This is a brand new case. There's for folks who use trading software at all, or they might be familiar with an app called Robinhood, and it's basically a very easy to use trading app. I've actually never used it myself, but you can buy and sell stocks on your phone. Significantly easier than other systems, other tools, and it's extremely popular among college students, to be honest. And their app crashed literally in the midst of the stock market kind of collapsed 2 weeks ago, and there's already 22 actions filed. They're probably going to be pulled together in a class action, if not already. Haven't gone through them in detail, but this app Robinhood is getting sued pretty quickly. There's also, we found already a privacy class action lawsuit involving Zoom and involving information basically being leaked from Zoom calls. Obviously, Zoom is one of the major beneficiaries of this crisis. Lots of webinar meetings like this occurring on Zoom, and they're already being sued, so they're beneficiary of the lawsuit as well. And then this one I also found pretty interesting. There's already a quackery lawsuit. There's a televangelist who has basically been promoting a cure for COVID-19 and selling it, and saying that it's, the complaint actually alleges that it's clinically tested and all natural. So there's some quackery that's going on already, and there's class action lawsuits involving that as well. So there's quite a bit of different types of litigation fallout that's going on here. Again, people are rushing to file these cases. In many ways, it's a little bit silly to do so, as soon as you file a case, they're not going to get a hearing for months anyway. But I guess they're trying to get these things on file and being the first. The big moral of the story, though, is really that civil litigation, while yes, there's some fun examples to pull out, that's very quickly grinding to a halt, where criminal proceedings are very much moving forward, and it's very much being affected by COVID-19. So for the criminal attorneys, now's the time to stay on your toes. For the civil litigation attorneys who are on the phone today, you might still be interested in looking at what's happening in criminal cases and how COVID-19 is affecting the substantive issues, because there might be some crossover. In a few months, when the civil litigation hopefully starts, picking up speed again, there could be some crossover between the way that these issues are addressed in the criminal space and how they're going to be addressed in the civil space. So that is my 45-minute talk. Went a little bit longer than I was expecting, but I'm going to pass it back to Erin to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Michael. That was actually a wonderful presentation. We don't have very many questions this week, but the only question that has popped up, would you mind speaking a little bit to some of the specialty courts that are available through the docket alarm? We saw a couple of examples flashing past, but if you wouldn't mind speaking to some of those more specialty courts that are available as well.
That's right. Yeah. So for folks who are new on this call, you might be wondering, I probably should have mentioned this earlier. What is it that docket alarm is even searching? When we're searching these docket sheets, what is it that we're actually looking through? So docket alarm has a very robust database of litigation across the country. We have all federal cases, obviously. That's kind of the first thing we added. We have numerous states. I think we have 24 or 5 states. I forget off the top of my head. You can count it up here. We're adding more states literally every month, so the number changes all the time. But we have, at this point, I think we have every single major metro area in the United States covered. In the eastern, actually, no, that's not true. We're getting Washington, D.C. in just a few weeks. But in California, all the metro areas are covered. We have Atlanta. We have, all the Florida metro areas. We have Ohio metro areas. Obviously, New York City, where I'm based. Quite a few metro areas across the country. And then we also have, as Aaron alluded to, a number of specialty courts. I used to be an IP attorney, so this is largely skewed based on my experience. But we have the Patent Trial and Appeal Board and the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board. And we have the Orange Book for Hatch-Waxman litigators. If there's any Orange Book Hatch-Waxman litigators on the phone, that's a specialty for patent litigation. We have the USITC, and we also have all of patent prosecution history, so you can look up through files, prosecution history files, and trademark prosecution history, so you can look through trademark prosecution history files. Many of these databases are only available. I mean, I'm not aware of other systems that allow you to search, for example, through all of Public Pair, which is the trademark, which is a patent file history system. So we have a full database of that, and a number of specialty courts. For the employment litigators out there, we have the National Labor Relations Board. For the tax attorneys out there, we have the U.S. Tax Court, and these all have a full docket sheet with a publicly accessible documents on them. Anything that's sealed is not on Docket Alarm, but all publicly accessible documents are. So the beauty of Docket Alarm is really that you can search cases, you can track cases, and you can run analytics in any of these courts. That answer the question?
Yes, that definitely answers the question, and thank you so much for answering that. And I'm just going to go ahead and do our final end reminders. We thank everyone for joining us for today's presentation, and we will be following up with today's webinar. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you very much.